So I'll just do a quick brief explanation since a lot of that wasn't recorded, and if it was, we can post it on YouTube later. But basically what we're gonna start is pizza. So pizza is one of my favorite things to make because it's cheap, it's easy, and most of all, you can make it in bulk if you want. So if you want to party, if you want to just have a lot of food left over, especially for when I was living in college on campus, I didn't have much with me, so pizza was kind of a great break from the dining hall that we had. But mainly pizza is great because you can make it however you want. You can make it vegetarian, vegan, or just full of meat if you'd like. This one we didn't put cheese on it, so if you're lactose intolerant, you can have that kind of pizza. But mainly what you're gonna need for making pizza is some flour, some yeast. We just have this kind of little printout of the package that we use because you can buy yeast packets. They come in about 2.5 to 2 3/4 packets each of yeast, and they're gonna come in about 3 packets kind of stitched together. But yeast is extremely cheap. You can buy it in the jar, you can buy it online. The most important thing is make sure it is active dry yeast. Rapid rise is not going to be what you want to use for this kind of pizza. There's other recipes out there that use rapid rise, and I can do that for another time. But active dry is the one I prefer because even though it takes a little longer, it comes out a lot better and you're going to get a better flavor for your pizza. Make sure you get the red package for active dry, at least for this kind of brand. If not, just look at the labeling. It'll clearly say active dry on there. So other than that, you're going to need about a tablespoon to a teaspoon of olive oil. You're going to need about 1 teaspoon or a little bit more of salt. You're going to need an extra cup of flour. Plain bleached flour is usually what I use. If you use unbleached wheat flour, what's going to happen is your pizza is going to be a little drier, so I recommend adding a little bit extra water. But then for your main flour, just make sure you have 2 cups of flour. And just have this in a very big dish. The bigger the better because this will get messy if you have a shallow dish. So the first thing you want to do is get in a microwavable dish bowl. That's what I use, but you could also put on the stove if you don't have a microwave with you. Basically what you want to do is get your 1 cup of water, stick it in the microwave for about 30 seconds, and what it'll do is that'll get it right at lukewarm. So if you have it at lukewarm, what happens is all of these little yeast packets or pellets, they're basically freeze-dried, so they're kind of sleeping right now. And you don't want to kill them with hot water, but you want to kind of wake them up. So all you're going to do is put the yeast in there, and then you're going to put water into the yeast. And just put it in there. You don't even have to stir it. You can maybe shake the bowl a bit just so all the water kind of touches the yeast. But you can see it kind of clouding up and breaking apart. That's good. That means that the yeast is kind of waking up and getting ready to work for our pizza dough. But make sure that you have it in there for 5 minutes. So I'm keeping track of my timer. It's going to be going for about 5 minutes. The next thing you want to do is, while that's mixing in and kind of setting, you want to get your salt. Again, this is going to be about, I'd say 1 teaspoon to maybe a little more. Salt's pretty important for pizza dough because if you miss this, it will get a little bland. So just kind of shake that into your dough or your flour. And then with the flour, you're just going to mix it around. And this is because if you do salt afterwards, when we're mixing the yeast water inside, what's going to happen is the salt is going to crystallize and get little chunks inside of your pizza dough, and that's not fun to mess with because then it's going to end up being in your slices and it's going to hurt when you bite on them. So this just makes it uniform and it makes it easier to mix later on. And again, if you have a mixer, I strongly recommend using that. Just makes this a lot easier, but again, when I was living on my own in a dorm with nothing really around me to kind of use, definitely not a mixer. I did everything by hand, so I'm going to show how I did it by hand too. Okay, so we're just going to let that mix around. You see it's kind of becoming a bit cloudy, and that's good. we're just gonna let that set for a little bit more. So now that we have that, I do want to talk about olive oil for a bit, since this is really important for pizza. So many may not know this, but olive oil actually has a distinct flavor for pizza. If you can use butter, you can use vegetable oil or corn oil, and what the point of the oil is to actually give it some bit of fat, a little flavor to it. And olive oil is the best one because of the fruitiness and a bit of the kind of unique flavor of olive oil. So I recommend anything that is regular olive oil to extra virgin. Definitely recommend extra virgin the most. Mixed olive oil you can use. Once you get to that avenue though, it's going to be a bit more like corn oil, and it's going to have a bit more of a strange taste to it. It won't really taste as much as pizza dough. So that's basically all you need to worry about for that. Lastly, if you are hoping to use wheat flour, again, be very careful with the kind of flour you're using. You can use bread flour as well. What that'll happen is, because bread flour has a little bit more extra gluten inside of it, you're going to have a chewier pizza, and the pizza may need a little bit extra time to kind of let it rest. And that's really because the bonds within the pizza is going to be a lot stronger between each of the gluten molecules. So basically, if you want to chew your pizza, use bread flour. If you want a pizza that's a little bit more healthy, use wheat flour and use some extra water. If you want a pizza that's just the way I made it, plain white flour is just fine. And you're gonna not notice too much of a difference if you don't really eat that much pizza anyway. So now that the yeast has gotten mixed up, we're just gonna pour it in here. So again, it already mixed into the water. You don't even have to worry about how much comes out, because all of the water carries all of the yeast. And all you're going to do is get your spoon, spatula, or anything you have with you, and you're just going to start mixing it up. Now this is going to be a bit of a difficult process, because again, you're going to be making dough out of this, and because of the amount of flour we have, what's going to happen is you need to put a little bit of muscle into mixing up the dough. And this is one of the reasons why I love working with any kind of pizza dough or dough in general. And that's because once you get enough of the water mixed in, and it's not really going to give you a club pan, it is very therapeutic to do, because you basically can have a giant stress ball to start punching and pushing and making sure that it's well mixed. And the reason why we have this extra flour here, about a cup in reserve, is because while you're mixing it, depending on where you are, the time of day, and the kind of water you use, even how hot it is, you may need to add some extra flour to it to make sure that it ends up becoming a full dough ball. The whole point is that each dough ball that you make is going to end up different depending on where you are. And so really, even though I'm giving a bit of measurements for the kind of flour and water you're putting in, I strongly recommend to do a little bit of experimentation, and don't be afraid to do that, because not everyone's pizza is going to be the same. And the best part about it is it's your own pizza. And when you make your pizza, feel proud that you made it. Don't worry about what it looks like, don't worry about what it tastes like. The fact that you made it is all what's going to be important. And the more you practice with it, the better it's going to become. And you might make your own pizza that you've never had before. And the whole point is to make sure that you have something like this. So this is the dough ball. I'm mixing it up, and if you can see that it's kind of sticking to my hands, that means that we have too much water and not enough flour. So what you do is you just get some of this flour, sprinkle it in there. Don't put too much, because you do not want it to become dried out. And you're basically just going to mix it back in. So this is why I was talking about making sure to have a fairly large bowl when you're doing this. You can also do this on a countertop as well. Luckily, I washed the countertop so we can do it straight on there, but I'd rather do this just in case to not have too much mess. But if you don't have a bowl for this, countertop works well, a cutting board. just a surface that's a little flat and cleaned, to make sure you can take time to just push all of this dough together. And again, you're basically just putting some muscle in there, making sure you're squishing it together because you want all of the water and all of the flour to combine thoroughly to make sure that when you're letting it rise later on, there's not going to be any air pockets caused by flour. You want air pockets only caused by the yeast, by the dough. So a little more sticky. I'm going to add a bit more flour to it just in case. And if you add too much flour to it, that's perfectly fine. You can go ahead and add probably a teaspoon or less of water, and then just keep mixing them together until you get a dough ball that's to your liking. The more watery that your dough is, the more moist that your pizza dough in general is going to become, and that's perfectly fine. If you have a preference, stick by that. So just be aware that if you have dough that's a little stickier than how I have it right now, you're going to have a bit of a club hand. So what I usually do to kind of fix that is I get a little pinchful of dough and I just mix it in my hands. And this will just give you a bit of a barrier to help out when you're mixing dough so that you don't have flour sticking to you all the time. While you're doing this as well, I recommend to immediately start getting your oven preheated since you really want to get that done. So what you do is, right on your oven, you want to make sure you put it on broil at high heat, the highest you can basically make it. And you want to have the rack as high up as you can as well. And this is because the pizza I make, I usually try mimicking East Coast style pizza, which is a little bit thinner than your typical pizza and requires higher heat as a result because you want to get all sides thoroughly cooked and you want to make sure that all the toppings are cooked as well and your cheese is melted. Yet you also do not want to have the inside kind of too cooked as well. You want it to be a bit chewy, but the top and the bottom is going to be a little singed. Not burned, more browned. And that's a really unique taste with East Coast style pizza that I usually prefer because it's just a little bit more fun to eat. So now that it's completely mixed together, I'm not getting club hands anymore from the kind of dough that I'm mixing. I can rip it apart and put it back together. And the whole point is you want to make sure that you're able to make a dough ball with this without it sticking to your hands anymore. If it's a little sticky, that's fine. You don't need to make it perfect. You just need to be able to form a ball out of this. So now that you have your ball made, you're just going to leave it there for now. Get a separate bowl if you can. If that's not possible, that's fine. Just set this on the side and clean out this bowl. But you basically want a bowl ready so that when you have this, you want to basically get a little bit of olive oil. And actually, I'm going to clean this out quickly. I want to make sure it's just nice and dry, or at least not too much water. But the whole point is you just want to make sure that you have some olive oil in there. And the whole point of the olive oil is to make sure that it's completely lubricated here. And that's because when you put your dough in here, it's going to grow and it's going to rise because of all of the yeast that was put inside. So now that we have this here, we're going to cover this and stick it in the fridge overnight. If you don't have time to put it overnight, you can also stick it on top of maybe an oven or just put it in a nice warm place. Nothing too hot, just a little bit of, I'd say 80-degree weather. Or if it's 70 degrees or 60, that's perfectly fine. It'll take a little longer, but you just want this to rise about double its size. So with this kind of bowl and this kind of dough, it's probably going to get about this high. And having it this high means that all of the yeast has eaten all of the sugars and has kind of grown and done much of its exercise or release energy. And that's basically going to allow it to rise in the oven. And you kind of want it to develop all of that gluten and become stronger, because the stronger your pizza dough is, the thinner you can make it, or just the more you can mess around with it without it kind of breaking on you when you're eating it. That's how you get that nice chewy texture with a good quality pizza. That's basically the gist of making it. So you can cover this, stick this in the fridge, or stick it to the side. And if you put it on the side, you can wait about an hour to 2 hours. But if not, just wait for it to get to double its size. I recommend the fridge method because the fridge method will have a much better flavor for the pizza. It's the same way sourdough is made. So if you put pizza dough in the fridge, you put it in there, that's going to basically give it a same effect as creating sourdough. Because whenever you're making sourdough bread, you stick it in the fridge and you let it sit there. If you make it sit for more than overnight and maybe do it for 2 nights, you're going to have a more sour taste to it. Not overbearing, but it is going to be a bit more interesting, and sometimes we want our pizza to be interesting. So once you have your dough risen, and I have this one here, you're going to grab it and you're going to punch out all of the air. Now again, don't be afraid if you get a bit of it stuck on your fingers, that's perfectly fine. Sometimes it still gets some more moisture, maybe from the oil. But you want to just let it kind of be back into a ball. Now this one I let rest a bit, but whenever you take it out of the fridge, or you start making it back into a ball if you left it out for 2 hours, you want to make sure you leave it alone for about a couple minutes. Again, I left this alone already, so it's kind of fine on its own. But that's because you kind of want it to just loosen up a bit, because when you're using a rolling pin or your hands, if you don't let it rest for a little bit, what's going to happen is when you start trying to stretch it, you're going to rip the dough right down the middle. And again, it's perfectly fine if you're in a rush. I'll show you how to fix tears. It's pretty easy to do. But if you want it to be a little easier for yourself and you have the time, let it rest for a couple minutes. So over here, you'll notice that I have a floured surface. A cutting board works perfectly fine. If you do not have a cutting board, what you can do is do it on your countertop. But you want to put flour because it's going to get a little messy at this point. Again, if you don't have that with you, you can also use a pizza pan. You can use parchment paper, you can use aluminum foil, just something to kind of flatten out the area for you so that it's a little easier to work with your hands. So if you have nothing but your hands, that's perfectly fine. Your pizza might come a little lumpy, but that's, again, it's your pizza, it's what you do with it because it's yours. But make sure that you keep check of flour, because the more you do this, the more you are pushing the outside out of the way, which shows the center, and you can see that the pizza's kind of picking up with my fingers. So if you start noticing that it's a little too sticky, just get a little bit of flour, pinchful, put some over, and rub the dough with it. Flip it over, get a little bit more flour, and rub it again. And again, this is just to make sure it doesn't stick. Now, since I have a rolling pin here, if you do have one, what I recommend doing so it doesn't stick to the rolling pin is, again, get some flour. Anything you don't want to have stick on, dust it with some flour. And so you just get your rolling pin and you're going to move it out. And again, this is very therapeutic for me, and I'm sure it might be for a lot of you as well, because you get to work with your hands and kind of, put a little muscle into there. Helps remove a bit of stress, especially right now when we're all kind of stuck inside. And the best part is you can make this any shape you'd like. I've had friends make a heart out of this. I've had friends who want to make a pizza with thicker edges, kind of like ones you'll buy at the store or whenever you go to a restaurant. And that, again, that's your pizza. You can do whatever you'd like. I'm more of a fan of making it flat and letting it rise on its own in the oven. But if you want it to be a little bit more fluffy, when you're done flattening out the pizza to your size, you can leave it alone for a little bit and it'll start rising once again. If you want a thicker pizza, you can go ahead and use 2 dough balls. Again, when you're making this, you just want to make sure that you make it to your liking. It's going to be your pizza, so you don't have to follow me to the T. I'm just here to kind of help you make something out of it. So you can see right now that the dough is pretty stretchy, and that's because I let it rest. If your dough's not able to do this, then that's perfectly fine. You get a hole like this. This is what I was going to talk about. You can easily fix it by flattening out a thicker part, folding it over, and then just pushing in. Get a little bit of flour as well, just to kind of make sure it doesn't stick to the rolling pin again. And then we can just go back to rolling. Always make sure you're checking the rolling pin and making sure it doesn't stick. Whether it's the pizza, whether it's your hands, or the rolling pin, just want to keep checking the flour, making sure it's not too sticky. If it rolls up a little bit, that's perfectly fine. But always make sure you're checking on it. And if you're noticing, it's actually going to be shrinking on you. And again, that's fine. It's just the dough kind of stretching back, and that's good. That means you have a very stretchy dough. You want to be able to have a dough that's very strong so that you'll have a very good pizza. So, we made it long enough. We made it big enough, at least to my liking, and it's pretty thin. And I like having thin pizzas, but again, if you want it thicker, you can make it either smaller, or you can have a second dough ball and you can make a thicker pizza with more bread in it. But now that we have our pizza made, you're gonna get your pizza tray. I just cover in aluminum foil to make sure it's easy cleanup, but you don't have to do that. And there's already flour all over the dough, so you can just throw it on. Kind of stretch it out with your hands to make sure it fits the frame. Again, if it doesn't perfectly make a circle, that's perfectly fine. You can also use a toaster tray, you can use a cookie tray. Anything that you have at home will work just fine. You just want it to be made of metal. Or if you have a pizza stone, what you can do is stick that in the oven, and when you're ready to put the pizza on top of it, just take it out of the oven, it will be hot, and then same thing as what I'm doing here, just spread it onto the pizza stone. So we have this done, we have it filled out, and now we're going to put it into the oven. So we're just going to stick it in here. I'd say for about 5 to 7 minutes. And the whole point is you actually want to get the pizza to set the dough itself. And again, this is just my own personal preference. You can actually skip this step if you don't want it to be as East Coast style as I'm making it. It'll just lose a bit of crunch. But if you want to follow along, the reason why I'm actually doing this is because it's going to set the bottom of the dough. And this is because I'm going to flip it. And I'll show you what that does at the end. But the whole point is that you want to have it crispy on both sides. And unfortunately, most ovens that are in your homes will actually be maybe only half to a quarter as strong as the ovens that other pizzerias will usually use, especially those with a brick oven. And that's really because they have ovens that are built for pizzas, and we have ovens that are built for everything. So that's why I mentioned that you can put it on high for broil, or just the highest setting you have. But it's still not going to be hot enough to make it just like a pizzeria oven. So that's why I'm putting it in here just for a little bit to let it kind of rise, let it set on the bottom, and then flip it over. And then we're going to do it again with our toppings. If anyone has any questions, now's a great time to ask. If not, you can just go ahead and just observe this pizza that's going on right now. All right, so now that it's been a few minutes, we can take the pizza out. And again, you don't want it to be too cooked. You just want it enough so that it kind of browns right here. And that's it. You just want that part cooked. And now that we have this cooked, we can set our pizza down, grab the dough, flip it over, watch your hands, it will be hot. You can see it steaming as well. And you can start putting your toppings on. So for this one, I am gonna put some sauce. And this is the same sauce that we made on Sunday. I just put it in a blender and I just blended it together. If it's not blended, that's perfectly fine. You can have it chunky as well. But you just wanna get it right in the middle, use your spoon. If you don't have a spoon, that's fine as well. The whole point is you just want to make sure that you spread it out perfectly, evenly. And there's a little spot right here behind this. A good note is that when you're putting sauce on your pizza, the further you get it to the edge, the more saucy the pizza is actually going to become. Because if you have any edge that doesn't have it touching sauce, it will become dry. And you can think of that as your crust if you enjoy crust. If you don't want that, that's perfectly fine. You can just start putting some more sauce towards the center. So I'm just going to have it flattened out. There we go. Doesn't have to be evenly spread out too much, just enough so it covers a lot. Now we'll have cheese. I recommend some part skim mozzarella because regular mozzarella is going to have a little too much fat in it and it will become a little too soggy. Part skim milk cheese is usually a lot better for pizzas because of its lower moisture content, and this will help it start melting quicker, but more importantly, it'll help it get browned as well. so you can get that nice pizza look that you usually see on pictures. So you just want to put a little bit on the edges, not too much. Here we go. Now, people in my house enjoy pepperoni, so I will put this pepperoni on this one. But you don't have to. I usually eat pizza without any meat on it, but it's up to your preference. It's however you want to have your pizza. And again, you can use any pepperoni that you have. You can get one from the store. You can find a long piece and cut them yourself. Doesn't matter. You just want to have enough to your liking and put it on top. The faster you're working with this, the better your pizza is going to become because the underside is still pretty warm. And you want it to be as hot as possible because again, we don't have an oven just like a pizzeria, but we can try to make it melt and become a crispy pizza, at least on the top. So now that that's there, you have some mushrooms that line around, you can throw those as well. Just kind of sprinkle it on. Doesn't have to be even. Just enough to add a bit of color to it. And I'm not much a fan of bell pepper, but again, my family loves bell pepper. So I'm going to throw some green bell pepper in here. Just throw a bit in there. There we go. So now you have your pizza completely made. You can grab it again, put it back into the oven, and just let it cook for, I'd say for about 8 minutes, maybe more or less. Depends on your kind of oven. But with something like that, just want to watch it for a bit. I recommend watching it until you have pizza that looks about like this. And the whole point of that is, again, get a bit of singed edges, the pepperoni singed, but it's not burnt. If you look at the bottom, it's perfectly fine, even after we did the flip method. And again, that's because you have a very sturdy pizza, very strong pizza, very crispy crust, yet chewy, so you can have pretty much the best of everything. That's why I enjoy East Coast pizza a lot. Again, if you want to make it California style, just use an extra layer of dough, and you may want to even skip the method that I did where you flip it. Just stick it in the oven and kind of wait until everything is firmly melted and it's a little brown on the top. You won't have it crispy, but that's usually how California pizza is. You can give it almost like Costco pizza. But that's basically all that I have. If you have any other further questions, again, leave a comment. You can email us at simplecookingstream@gmail.com. You can also go to our YouTube page later on. We're going to have this uploaded soon enough, as soon as YouTube allows us. And that's basically to make sure that you guys can look over anything that you missed. If you have any further questions as well, I can leave this on for a little bit just while the last pizza is getting done. But that's basically all that I have. Tune in for next Wednesday and I'll be making something new. So see you later.